Many years ago I had a very strange occurrence that I will never forget. I hope never to be in any kind of situation like this again. When I was younger, around 18 or so, I lived up the street from an old cemetery. I would sometimes go hang out with a friend at that cemetery, and I never had an issue with it. There were woods behind the cemetery that stretched for a few miles. The path would split and go either deeper into the woods or up into a street a few miles from where I lived. I decided to visit these woods at around 2 a.m. I had done this before and had zero fear about doing it. It did not bother me to be out at the cemetery at that hour. I left my house, taking a shortcut, and soon was in the woods a little ways from the cemetery. For some odd reason, I decided to start a campfire and started it in the middle of the trail. The trail was big enough for a car or truck to drive through. I dug a small hole, threw in some twigs and dried leaves, started the fire. No big deal. It was only a few moments later I had a wave of terror wash over me. It's hard to explain how truly surreal the feeling was. I somewhat heard the sounds of leaves being crushed by a footstep. But, this sound was very faint. It was also coming right toward me. I was frozen in panic and terror, because if I ran, whatever that was making the noise would hear me, and I knew it would give chase. I looked to my right and saw a huge oak tree. Rather massive. Almost the same time I saw this tree, I heard a voice in my head. "Go now, hide." I pushed the dirt into the small hole to put out the fire and then went behind the tree. I was opposite the path the footsteps were coming from. I was worried that once they passed the tree they would see me behind the tree. In almost perfect response to my fear, I again heard the voice in my head tell me, "You will move when I tell you to move." So, I stood behind the oak tree and waited. I then heard the footsteps come even closer, as I knew whatever or whoever had finally arrived. They walked forward and I felt their presence as I was still bathed in dread. But, I was also curious. What was this thing I was hiding from? Could I maybe take a look at it? Just peek. Almost as quickly as I got the thought out of my head to peek, the voice in my head was very loud and firm. "Do not look." So, I closed my eyes and concentrated. I blocked out the sound of the footsteps and waited for this voice to guide me. It wasn't soon after I was commanded, "Move." I stepped over a step. I made no noise. A second or so later again I was told, "Move." I stepped another step over as the tree hid me from this night terror. 2 more times the voice commanded I move until I was hidden on the opposite side of the tree, while the footsteps continued into the darkness toward the way I had walked to get to that point. I continued to wait until I could not hear the footsteps anymore. I followed the path in the opposite direction until it opened up to the street. There was a main highway that connected here and would take me back to my house. After another 20 minutes, I was home. I have never returned to those woods since that incident. I drove by the graveyard and there are gates and no trespassing on the old entrance to those paths. I have absolute faith that the voice I heard in my head that night was God. I don't know what I was saved from that night. I don't go out walking around at 2 a.m. either.